Families around the world are being victimized by ideologies and political agendas, and they are afflicted by a wide range of issues from divorce and infidelity to abuse of all different kinds, religious persecution, and secularism and consumerism. How can we help and protect the family from these various forces? We'll talk about that tonight, so please stay with us. Thank you very much. I'm Father Mitch Pacwa, and welcome to EWTN Live. We're bringing you guests from all over the world, and we've got a globe-trotting guest on tonight. But before we get to that, I want to mention that we're celebrating the feast of St. John Chrysostom. He was a bishop, and he still is a doctor of the church, born in 349. Think about that. It's just, barely 30 years, 35 years after the legalization of Christianity. And while Christianity was now legal and in fact became the official religion of the empire during his lifetime, there was still a lot of problem, because even though some people were baptized and were part of the government, they were corrupt. And other Christians were living very worldly lives instead of taking the gospel to heart. St. John Chrysostom addressed that very directly. It got him in trouble, and he got banished from his diocese. But he is someone who also did tremendous work to call people. And he gave one of the early sermons criticizing slave ownership that later on became the norm for the church to eradicate slavery. But he was one who wrote, "Who are you to enslave someone else whom Christ has set free?" And he's a great, great doctor of the church, standing up to power with the gospel of Christ. So I urge you to read him. You can go to our website, EWTN.com, go to our documents library, type in St. John Chrysostom, and you'll see a lot of his writings are there for you to download for free into your computers. All right, we have a guest tonight, and he works very hard to protect life and strengthen families all around the world in order to build that culture of life and love that Blessed Paul VI and St. John Paul II talked about. He does so through education, outreach, and advocacy. So please welcome the President of Human Life International, Father Shenan Boquet.
Thank you, Father. Good to have you here.
It's always a delight, to have you here. Both of us travel around. You travel far more than I, because Human Life International is a global organization. Right. And you've got representatives all over, and you teach seminarians and bishops and priests and lay people all over the world. Right. And I think of the kind of thing we do, the line from the chapter 1 of the book of Job, where the Lord asks, "Where have you been?" Prowling, patrolling the world, Now I ask it of Satan, so we don't want to go there. Right. But certainly prowling and patrolling the face of the earth and seeing a lot of what's going on. Right. What are some of the dynamics that you see developing globally?
Well, it's a beautiful analogy, kind of traversing the world.
And I think that the thing that I see is both positive and some negatives, of course. But let's start with the positive. I think people like to hear good news.
Yes.
And the good news is that there are people just like us who really believe in the dignity of human life, believe in the family, believe in what the church teaches, and wants to see these prosper. And so there are people that every day diligently, with great fervor and perseverance, are out there every day trying to build that culture of life, promoting what the church teaches about the dignity of the human person. And just an example would be, just recently, our director in Dar es Salaam, who oversees our...
Well, where is Dar es Salaam? A lot of folks don't know their geography.
So it'd be Tanzania, so near on the
Okay.
Indian Ocean. And so there, Emel Hagamu is our director, has been working with us for over 30 years. Mel is a former teacher, professor, and just recently he got a phone call from a young woman who was with child and was being pressured into giving up her baby to abortion, and because of the circumstances. And so she reached out to Emel because he was well known in the media, well known in the TV, in a sense being on TV. So she recognized him and she was able to search him out. And so she reached out, and Emel says, "I will help you." And so these are the kind of people that are out there that are doing heroic things every day that we don't even hear about.
Yeah.
Protecting life, loving life, serving life. And of course the media doesn't talk about these. They want to push the other cause in the other direction of the peddlers of death. But the idea here is that there are good people, just simple people, doing great things, and it's a joy to represent them. So HLI, is working on all the continents. We right now have 120 active affiliates around the world. We have our international directors.
Even Antarctica?
Well, no, not on Antarctica, but I'm looking for a volunteer.
I'd like to go.
So
I've never been.
Neither have I, but it'd be an interesting assignment. But everywhere else, they're working very strongly, to promote this. And of course, the negatives, I think people are familiar with. They read the newspaper, see the news. There's just even recently, here after the difficulty of Harvey, we just put a little press release out today that there are people that are saying, we will give free abortions. We will help you. For those of you who are pregnant and struggling right now after this hurricane, we will help you by helping you have an abortion. So these are the attitudes that we see around the world. And so it's important for us to recognize what is at stake here. Yeah. And to really, as you said beautifully earlier, and that is, how do we like St. John Chrysostom, how do we expose the great lie? How do we help people to see the truth? And it requires a lot of education, fervor, requires patience, and a willingness to suffer. As St. John did, he suffered exile and just outward persecution because of his willingness to stand in the breach and be a bishop and be a teacher and be an apostle. And that's what we need today. We need disciples who are willing, to preach what the world doesn't want to hear. So, Human Life International, just like EWTN, in talking about the family. And of course, when we mean family, we mean what God instituted: husband, wife, in a lifetime, fruitful union, until death do them part. But that's not the definition the world wants to teach.
And most of the time, in countries around the world, it's not only mother and father and children. The extended family of the importance of grandparents, aunts and uncles and cousins is huge in most countries. Here, part of the problem is that our families have gotten more isolated as these nuclear units instead of the wider ranging aspect of family.
It's one of the biggest struggles. As you mentioned earlier to our audience before we began, I'm from South Louisiana. My dad is one of 16 children. And so most of those children live within that very community. And so I was raised in a very strong family system, with our aunts, our uncles, our grandparents, even great-grandparents I had the joy of knowing. And those really have left an indelible mark. And it's one of the structures that, one, God has established, two, that the church promotes. But today, you're absolutely right. When you travel around the world and you see, because of the globalization of the world, families are being pulled apart, sometimes for work, sometimes because of prosperity issues or corruption in countries. You see so many issues. And one of the big challenges today is migrant workers. And it's a topic that's not talked about enough, not only within the secular conversation, but even within the church. because, for example, in Dubai and in Taiwan, you have large migrant populations. Macau, another example. So you have strong amounts of people migrating to a very area, not to live permanently, but because of work. As a consequence, what's happened is they're separated from their families, they're separated from the nucleus of support, and what happens? Inevitably, if their faith and their determination to stay true to their marriage, true to their vocation, true to their purity, they stumble and fall. So the structures that are there naturally in the family are not there now. So they fall into so many misbehaviors, and it causes so much harm.
Yeah.
Even Mexico, for example, recently someone told me a husband had moved to the United States for work, and unfortunately he was separated from his family, became disconnected from them. They even thought maybe he had died. Well, what sadly would happen, he met someone, married someone here in the States, though he was still married back in Mexico. So they tried to bring him home, and so you can almost imagine the hardship upon his wife back in Mexico, his children, family, and so this is happening.
And the woman here, and perhaps her children.
Exactly.
I come across that kind of situation repeatedly. It's not just one person.
Right,
This
exactly.
is, and it's all too common, and it's a great distress, for everybody involved.
Right.
It's another element too is that's grown enormously is the reality of children born outside of wedlock. Many of the children, do you remember when President Obama's administration was bringing a number of children from Latin America? And at first I was wondering, where are their parents?
Right.
Well, a lot of times they don't know.
No.
They're raised on the streets.
And we see this. I was recently in India, down in Bangalore, and one of the beautiful stories there, Sister Nunciata, who is 83 years old, who is a Good Shepherd sister, and we as our affiliate director there. And it's amazing. The sisters work with especially young girls that are abandoned, left on the streets. And Sister, her whole life, has worked with children who have been lost or abandoned or just completely given up by their families because they can't care for them. And to see the love and the tenderness of the sisters and the community come together around these young women, and to see now these young girls who now are adults themselves, living beautiful lives, family lives, living the virtue of a family that they learn from the sisters. It's very, very beautiful. And again, it's a good positive story, but I was amazed to see how many young girls were in the school. That really did surprise me to see so many. And they had two different schools. You had a school where the young girls came from united families. So mom, dad, and all the extended family. Then you had another part of the school where these girls came from abandoned situations. And so, but they brought them together to teach them those values and to help. So it is a reality. We see this especially in underdeveloped parts of the world where poverty is so difficult. And you see even parents, very sadly, I just know of a situation recently where a mother found herself with another child. She was pregnant, but she could not take care of the first child because the husband had abandoned her. So after he found out that she was pregnant with a second child. And so this is a reality too, and this is again where the beauty of the church, and this is what makes our church so unique and so beautiful, because we step into those moments, and we have done it since the very beginning of our foundation to reach out to the Anoim, to reach out to the poor and the needy, and to care for them. It's a beautiful heritage to be part of that great mission of Christ and of God, to go out in search of the lost and to help those in need. And it's just a joy to meet people doing that work every day. But the challenge is, I think many people in our culture, especially Western culture, have really become callous to this, very self-centered. One of those isms that John Paul the Great used to talk about was individualism. It's all about me. I'm the center of the universe, and my pleasure, my joys, all my comforts, and all my power. It's all centered in the self. And this is one of the big challenges of the gospel, is that Christ pierces through that. And the whole life and family movement is about not the self, it's about the other.
Yeah.
And it's trying to break through that. And part of the work that we have to do today is change people's language. People have lost the language of family. They've lost the language of brother, sister, extended family, cousins. Some families don't even have, their cousins are so small. I have so many cousins, I don't even know them by name.
Yeah,
there's so many of them.
Sure. Well,
and so I know how they look.
15 aunts and uncles plus their spouses.
Exactly. That's on my dad's side. My mother's got a large family too, so I know them by how they look. Oh, you must be so-and-so's child. You look just like her.
Yeah.
So, but this is something that the vocabulary or the language of the family has become so lost in our Western cultures and our very secular cultures. And today, for example, if you watch any TV, you'll see people, young couples, not with children, with animals. You mentioned your 2 cats earlier.
Yeah.
But for many, many couples, that becomes their children. They treat their animals as if they were children. Not having children, not being open to children. And this is a language that we have to start piercing through again. And they're wanting to love. They want to love. They want to care for something. And so, but we have to help them not to be frightened. I find it's fear. It's fear of family. It's fear of children.
And I think in many of the cases with young people I've known, they're also afraid to fail at marriage.
Right.
So I better not get married lest I fail.
Right.
Well, that becomes a different kind of failure of relationships.
Correct.
I compare a lot, especially young men more than young women. They remind me of 10-year-old boys that go up to the high dive and they look down too long and they won't make the jump. Right. And there's a fear of failure at marriage that seems to
Absolutely.
affect a lot of young people.
And of course today, it depends what culture they're emerging from, but if the divorce rates are very high, then we see this as a consequence. An article I just wrote not long ago talked about the fact that if a couple comes from a divorce situation, how much more prone they are toward that same inevitability. That if they have a mom and a dad that come out of a divorce situation, a husband and wife come out of a divorce situation, it's even escalates. So this is a fear that definitely is present. And again, the church has to step into these conversations and know that they exist. And one of the big problems today too is cohabitation. And it's a consequence of the divorce. It's a consequence of the brokenness of families, the fear factor. So they think, even though they are simulating a marriage, they are simulating marital life by living together, living as husband and wife, de facto living as a married couple, but they're afraid to make that leap to marital life, make it a formal commitment because they're afraid of divorce. They're afraid that they will be abandoned. And it feeds into the lack of wanting children, and which feeds right into the hand of the anti-life community that feeds on this and plays on this. And so these are the challenges, some of the challenges. One of the other things that's a huge challenge today really is the whole fornication, the whole promiscuity industry, the whole sex industry. You can't turn on the TV today or pick up a periodical without it being generated from a perversion of sexuality. Yeah. It's a marketing tool today. So it's a challenge today because this is the language that people are speaking. So our young people are speaking a language. So if you go into a school system, I was in Guatemala, and they were actually teaching 6-year-old children how to use condoms, how to use at 6 years of age, and some younger. And you're thinking this is what they're teaching, especially young girls, in the school system. And so this is the language that kids are being raised in. They're being taught in their schools through the public books, that it's mommy and daddy, it's dad and dad. You have all these families now. And so our young people are confused. They're so confused. And then if you and myself as Catholic educators step into those environments and we try to teach what is true, we are considered to be, not lack of compassion. We're not tolerant. We're not acceptant. We're not, looking at the issues of the times. So it's a challenge.
Instead of taking the message of the gospel of family on its own merits
Correct.
And engaging that, it's that, well, you don't have a right to talk about that.
Correct. Correct.
And you know, undercutting it.
Exactly.
And you know, something, you know, too, I think it's worth bringing up. Our own Center for Disease Control did a study showing the increased sales of various contraceptives.
Right.
And as they have a graph, you can measure how many were sold since 1971, I think they start. And then you also see that the increase of abortion follows the same curve.
Correct. That's right.
So does the increase of unmarried motherhood and fatherhood.
Correct.
And so does the increase of sexually transmitted diseases.
Correct.
So that the more people use contraceptives, the more unplanned and unwanted pregnancies they get and sexual diseases. They complain, well, you don't let them use it. Well, you do, and you give it away. And the more these things get used, they increase. It was totally counterintuitive.
Exactly.
They didn't expect that. But the answer is people hear that it is safe sex.
Right.
And so they take greater risks.
Well, consider just on a completely different subject. Just for example, just recently, you know, our audience may recall that there was a CBS article on Down syndrome in Iceland. People may recall this. So I just released an article on this, and again, and so you look at this, that the percentage of children that are diagnosed with Downs, you know, in the womb, are almost 100% are put to death. Now we look at this. Well, it's not a government policy, but what's happened is that the government offers this as an option of consideration, you know, to women who are dealing with the situation. But what's happened is that it's become such part of the mindset that the government doesn't have to push. The government doesn't have to, quote, enforce anything. People just accept it. It's become part of them. And this is the same thing with the contraceptive mentality. You know, one of the approaches that I like to take is we talk about the issue, so contraception, we talk about abortion, but if I take those out of the equation and we just get back to what the church teaches, the beauty, the goodness of human sexuality, its proper place, its proper function, its proper duty, and just start from the principle of the good, the beautiful, and just start from that principle. Again, it's a language that people don't think about. Just like I did with the Down syndrome, is that I got a response on an email, and a woman said to me, she says, in all your teaching, do you try to help people to see how better the world would be if we just protected every human life? How it would change people's minds? And she's right on target. Absolutely. Is that if every life, no matter how that little life comes to be, no matter the condition of that little life, doesn't matter. It's a human life. And we love and we respect and we honor that life. It would change our cultures. It would change us drastically because we would not tolerate any disregard toward human life. And that's a challenge for us.
And I remember, I couldn't tell you where it was because this was back about 68 in a sociology class in college. And it was an article I just happened to see, but it brought out the societies that killed the physically or mentally disabled children in that culture.
Right.
Were societies that became more violent.
Yes.
And cultures that protected the mentally disabled and physically disabled tended to be more gentle. They have not the same gifts that the college professors and bright students would have. They bring another gift of evoking gentleness as we care for them. And that's a gift in itself in an increasingly violent society.
Exactly. I mean, I'll get an example back to family life. You know, it's interesting that, you know, we teach as a church that the first school of learning is the family. And I mean, the first hospital, you know, the first government, you know, is the family. It's where we learn these core primary values of tenderness, of compassion, of pity, of mercy, of forgiveness. We learn it in the family unit. If the family unit, meaning mom, dad, the extended family, are living the life of the gospel, this becomes infused within the heart of all the children, and we learn this. I remember learning this, and my dad, even today, who's 73 years of age, my dad is, does not accept disrespect toward anyone. And we were raised in a very strong, heavy hand that if we showed any disrespect toward anyone, we paid a price for that. In other words, we were given a very strong lesson. But what my father was trying to teach was a value. That's not only a value for me as an individual, but it's a value for society. Right. Society is better because I am that kind of man that respects other people. And this is the part that's been lost in the culture, where we have, back to that individualism. If it's all about me, I don't care about you. I could care less about you. Right. It's about me. What do I gain from this? And if I gain nothing, then why be involved? This is the mentality that we have to break through. And this is why, we have to keep going back to that family unit. We have to start finding a way to help our families, help our couples, help our extended families to live those values. And because they themselves are being victimized by a very, very strong, heavy-handed culture that is not helping them. And so working against them. So if, as good parents, you send your children to school. Like any good parents, you want your child to succeed. You want your child to have good learning skills. But you send them into an environment today that's hostile to your core values. And so you've prepared your child well, even your young adult. You send them off to college today into a very hostile world in most cases. So we have to start talking about rebuilding those structures, especially as a church. I mean, we have a strength we're able to do this. I mean, over 1 billion people around the world, we have a very heavy hand in what happens in society. But we're not doing a very good job of it.
This is something where I know you get to a lot of seminaries. You do speak to lots of groups of priests and bishops around the world. And we as priests and bishops need to speak more about these things and include them in our homilies. I think some are afraid to say something because there are people in the congregations who come from difficult situations, if not ones that are sometimes grounded in sin of various kinds. And we still have to speak out without and let them know, though, we're not pointing at you as you're a bad, but we want you to hear this good news and see what can we do to rectify.
Again, it's raising a language that is always true in every age, and helping people to see the good, to see the beauty. And even though I may have fallen, I may have failed, by no fault of my own or by my own fault, doesn't mean that I can't reach for that ideal. So maybe I'm in an irregular situation, but with the help of the church, I can maybe have this situation regularized, correct the behavior, correct the situation, and really live the life that Christ wants me to live. It's always very profound for me is when Christ is being challenged, about the issue of divorce. Moses gave us a writ of divorce. Our audience is quite familiar with the passage of Matthew's gospel. And so, but our Lord says, but this is not how it was in the beginning. And so the Lord reorients us. He's trying to reorient us back to what was once established, what God's plan is. And this is the part that we as a church must continue to speak about. I find at times, and I'm just as guilty, dealing with all this ugliness at times, we tend to keep that language. And I've been challenging even myself, to talk about the good, to talk about the beautiful. An example of this would be the church is not against anything. We're for love. We're for joy. We're for peace. We are for. And so if we start with that kind of language, no matter where a person may be, we all want to achieve. We want to grow. We want to do better with our lives. And so we shouldn't be afraid. But you're absolutely right, Father. There's so many of our brothers are intimidated by a very, very strong voice in the community. I mean, I came from parish work before going to Human Life International. I know exactly what many of our brothers deal with. And it's hard when you look out at your congregation and because you know them, and you know that some of them are not where they could be in the Lord. So, but you pull them aside, you meet with them, you talk to them, and then you let them know, listen, there's a few readings coming up in a couple of weeks. I'm letting you know now that I'm going to be talking about some very difficult issues. But remember, as you said, I'm not talking specifically to you. But,
or at you.
Yeah. But I am speaking about a truth that we're all called to live. But right now I find that we're afraid to talk our own teaching. We're afraid.
Political correctness sort of silences us. We have to take a little bit of break, Father. It's time to do that. But if you want to find out more about the wonderful work that Human Life International is doing, you can go to their website, which is hli.org. hli.org. Also, you can call them. The number is 1-800-549-5433. 1-800-549-5433. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. I want to get some of your comments and questions, as well as those of our studio audience. So please stay with us. Thank you and welcome back. We're talking to Father Shenan Boquet about Human Life International and the global crisis that we have in regard to family and some of the issues that we have to address that. Let's take a question from our studio audience. Sir, where are you from?
From San Diego Vista, California.
Great, great. Good to have you here. And your question?
A question I had in regards to a Christ-centered marriage. Bishop Fulton J. Sheen wrote a book called Three to Get Married. And with the divorce rate being over 50%, we have some issues in my own family. And we also, that a Christ-centered marriage, the rate is in somewhere in the 20% range, 25% range. Can you comment on that at all?
So the rate of divorce among people who are focused on Christ is half or less than half. And also, just as a little side point that you might comment on too, people who use natural family planning have a divorce rate closer to about 2%.
Right. Very, very low.
Yeah, extremely low.
That's right. And both, reflect, and it's very, thank you for your question. It's a very good question and an observation. We consider that when we look at marriage as a vocation, it's very different than looking at it from a secular definition. So it's not just a man and a woman marrying each other, maybe having children, going to work, buying a house, buying a car, putting money aside, retiring one day, travel around the world, and then you die. That's not what married life is. It's parts of it in a sense of, but married life is a vocation. And to really see each other, through that spectrum, husband looking at his wife looking at her husband, through those spectrums, or through those windows, those eyes, changes your view, because you realize that what you're working on together is salvation, and that you're helping each other to serve the Lord, to love the Lord, and to be with our Lord for all eternity, and then to raise your children in that light and under that umbrella, and to pass on to that next generation the same value, the same love. This is a very different language, and that's why, what Archbishop Sheen talked about, and what we beautifully teachings of natural family planning, when we look at this, and a couple that becomes very reflective of these values are happier. Their unity with each other is profound. Their physical joys of husband and wife, of their intimacy, is much more beautiful, much more profound, much more life-giving. They see it very differently. And children become welcome guests, not seen as a problem, not seen as a page on a data sheet or on or your CPA account book. They look at children and they look at family life through that beautiful vocation. And this is why, if Christ is the heart of the marriage, I mean, I know this personally with my own family. When our family members, many of them who I've watched, separate themselves from their faith, faith becomes pushed to the side. Other things enter in, and you watch their marriages struggle. You watch even, sadly, some of them divorce. Why? Because Christ is not the heart. He's not the glue. He's not the foundation stone of their marital embrace. And so he's the unwelcome guest. So basically, Sheen's book would be, can change. Instead of, three making the marriage, it would be, well, no, we don't want God in our marriage. And we know that if God is not in the marriage, it will struggle, and it does.
One of the themes I make in marriage homilies and in marriage prep is that if you love each other more than you love Christ, you're making a huge mistake.
Right.
Because you're going to expect one another to be as good or better than Christ.
Right.
And you're not marrying that person.
No.
The only kind they have out there is sinners. They don't make the sinless kind for you. And your spouse will agree with that.
Right. That's right.
And so, given that we're sinners, we need to love God first. Right. And the irony is, we end up loving one another better and more deeply because we love Him ahead of our spouse or our children.
Yes.
We accept them as they are.
Exactly.
I'm a sinner who needs Jesus to forgive me, and they're sinners too.
Well, it's interesting. So many, having officiated weddings for so many years as priest, one of the readings that is so vividly chosen is the reading, love is patient, love is kind, love is never jealous. But you ask a couple, tell me what this means.
Yes.
And they look at you kind of like a dog, a little puppy dog, well, what do you mean, Father? And so, but tell me flesh these words. What does it mean that love is always patient, love is always kind? The operative word is always kind, always forgiving, always merciful. So where does this always come from? If it comes from me, then always does not exist. If it comes from Christ, He is always.
Yes.
And so it's important to teach, again, those core values. And it's interesting, when I officiate weddings, one of the beautiful phrases I like to say is to the groom, today you learn to die.
Yes.
Die. And oftentimes after the wedding, they will always say, why don't you say that to the bride? I said, because if the husband, who truly is the spiritual head of his family, really models Christ to his wife, and then she in turn reflecting that love back in Christ, the two will become one. And the beauty of this, so it starts in him. It means one's better than the other. It's just looking at him and saying, do you understand the commitment you make today? Do you understand what it is you are saying to her in these vows today, that you have been living now in this time of engagement, preparing now takes on a very different meaning. And so this always has to be the center. He has to be the center. And again, this is a hard language today because, again, as our guest said, when so many today, sadly, coming from broken environments, coming from single-family homes now, they're coming from parent homes, so they're coming from all this different environment, and then they come and present themselves for marriage in the church, but you begin to try to talk to them about these core fundamental principles, and they're puzzled because no one's spoken to them on this language. No one's reflected to them to this.
And they may not have seen it. Some have.
Correct.
But some have not.
Right.
And it's, I think along the same lines, in Ephesians 5, which is another important text for weddings, in Ephesians 5, it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loves the church.
Right.
What did he do for the church? He died.
That's right.
And I emphasize in there, Jesus is not enthroned on an easy chair, watching the game or reading the paper. He's enthroned on a cross.
Exactly.
And that's where the husband, shows that love of his wife.
It's interesting, the contraceptive issue we talked a little about earlier. I remember a young husband came to me and said, Father, my marriage is struggling. And so I sat down and we talked. And one of the things I learned was that they were employing contraception, so a contraceptive mentality. Mm-hmm. So I challenged him and eventually was able to bring both he and his wife together. And we talked about this and were able to move them away from this behavior. And he came back, a number of years later and thanked me. And I said, you don't owe me thanks. Give God the praise. It's to him that belongs the glory. Yeah. And I said, but he says, not only did we save the marriage, he says, I love my wife today more than I ever thought I could love. He says, I was a selfish man, a selfish man. And I thought I was expressing love to her, but I was acting selfishly. And he says, and only by opening my eyes to the truth did I begin to see that. And this is the part where we go back to priests and our bishops we talked about earlier. How do we bring this teaching to bear? How do we boldly, firmly, but gently, teach and guide? We shouldn't be afraid. And it's interesting that, the church has always been a guide to families. And more than ever today, the church needs to step in this breach. We can't be cowards in this conversation today. Yeah. Our families are struggling, and struggling doesn't even do it justice. They are really victimized. They are being outwardly persecuted in this culture. And as you said beautifully in the beginning with Bishop St. John Chrysostom, he stepped into the breach. He stepped in front of the muzzle of that gun, if you will, and defended his own. And was willing to take that bullet, take that persecution. This is what we need today. And again, none of us want to get out there and face that, but that's what it's going to take today. And it's interesting, and maybe is to think, but yet we're asking couples to do that. And this is what always upsets me, is we're asking our married couples to live the gospel of Christ in the world, in their workplaces, in their recreation. But with all respect, we're doing little to help them. And we're not giving them the sound teaching and the foundation they need to go out into the battle. So what happens? They go to the battle, but they get eaten alive. They get taken down.
And this is something that is not solely the task of the clergy, especially for us Catholic clergy. We people will say to me, oh, you priests don't get married. What do you know about marriage? Well, you married people, tell us everything.
So we know a lot.
Matter of fact, I've been saying it for the last few months. I preached during Holy Week to the men in particular, said, I want you men to come to confession. Yes. All I ever hear is your wife's version of what you do wrong.
That's right.
I want to hear your side of it.
Exactly.
But there's something else that other good Catholics, folks who have sometimes experienced the problems of marriage, and have groups like Retrovi.
Exactly.
Other groups that have wonderful marriages that didn't have those crises, but they still need strengthening and learning skills like in Marriage Encounter. And all sorts of deacons and their wives and lay people as married couples do a lot to contribute to the preparation of couples, and we may need to increase the time of marriage prep to help get some of that done.
I'd agree with that very much. And the mentoring is very important. One of the things I tried to do in one of my last assignments, and I tie this into the strategies of Human Life International, is finding, so let's say you have a couple from 0 to 10 years. then I would try to find couples that are 10 to 20 years to be mentors of those in the 0 to 10 years. And do the same thing as you keep moving up the age bracket. And it's so important because what you just said, I mean, you know, so many young couples who have never had children, imagine being pregnant for the first time, expecting your baby. There's so many things you hear, so many things, but you don't know. But yet your mother knows, and your grandmother knows, and friends in the parish know. They were there. They remember those moments. And they're there to help. We need to tap into these resources. And you know, and maybe a way, you know, that our audience and all of us can really appreciate is that as dioceses, as parishes, as a church, what are we doing to help? And so I've been mentioning it a few times, so maybe this is a moment we can talk a little bit about that is, you know, one of the things that I see missing globally is apostolic work for families in every diocese. There may be a family life office, there may be a name, but in actuality, is there an actual center? Is there a place where families can go, where they can find good counsel, where they can find not only clergy, religious, lay faithful, there to help them, to answer questions, to be there when there's moments of difficulty, to be there when there's moments of joy. You know, we always think about the need, but there's also time just to be supported, to be encouraged. You know, maybe I did this when I was a younger priest, sadly can't do it today. It's an unfortunate reality. But you know, I had friends that I would send them on date night, married couples, and I'd babysit. Now, today, many of our bishops would go, you can't do that today. It's unfortunate.
Right.
But yet we still should find a way.
That's a result of the scandals that took place. And so now we have to do it, though, if we get proper adult supervision.
Well, of course. And that's exactly. But I remember it was so, yeah, exactly. And it's funny, I remember an old pastor, he's now deceased, and he comes home, and I was an associate when I was doing this, and he comes and he goes, what are all these kids, you know, in the center? So what's movie night, the date night for their parents? And he said, he says, when did we start this? And he sat down on the floor and he played with the kids. And the kids who are now adults have never forgotten what he did. And I think as priests, you know, today, you know, we've been embattled. You know, we got some scars because of some of the sad things that have occurred, you know, with our brothers, and we've done some very harmful things. But we shouldn't be stunted. And we're stunted. And that's a dangerous thing in that, you know, and the devil uses it to keep us away from being truly fathers of our families and reaching out as a spiritual father to help our families, to walk with them. You know, we keep talking about this accompaniment, but we're doing very little to walk, you know, with those who are trying so hard to live the family value that God has instituted. And we're focusing in, and we should have a conversation about those with situations that are difficult, but we're making that the primary focus. And we're not focusing on supporting the ones who are fighting the good fight, who are in the battle, who are trying so hard to live that value that Christ has given to them.
I think, you know, when you look at the reality, you know, the pre-scandal was 1.8% of all the priests in the country. The other side of that is 98.2% didn't do any of that stuff, and we can't let what went wrong negate the good work that we need to do.
And to govern our decisions and like you said, we just find another path. Obviously, I wouldn't do that today, but I would find a good other support system with other adults and families, and still create an environment where we can do that. And I think it's important that we need to be creative. And
when you think that, you know, in so many ways, the extended family is not necessarily around. Maybe in a small town in South Louisiana, where 80% of the people are your relatives.
Especially my hometown.
that's one thing. That's why they have to travel in that state. They have to go meet people that they're not related to marry. But on the other, on the other, then they go home. But then on the other hand, you know, creativity would be having folks who are, you know, rented grandparents and aunts and uncles and all that, that you get the more mature members of the parish to become involved. And become substitute grandparents, aunts and uncles for these families to give
Exactly.
The young couples chances to get out, and the kids other adults to hang out with.
Yes, absolutely. And also in reverse. You know, one of the things we did when I was back in the parish before moving to Human Life International was we had the young kids adopt grandparents.
Yeah.
And it's so all in the reverse, teaching young kids, you know, about an extended family as well. And you're absolutely right. And I think that's a good thing for us to be all thinking about, whether we're lay faithful, whether we're clergy, religious, bishops listening to the program. You know, we ought to be thinking, what can we do? What should we be doing to walk and help our families? And as you said in the very beginning, our family being not just our mom and our dad and our siblings, but our aunts, our uncles, our grandparents, our godparents, our extended family. And then as Catholics, our non-blood relatives, they are our family too.
Yeah,
How do we look at the family? And I think that's why we have to reintroduce a language about the family. You know, I know when I preach, when I say family, I know what I mean. But the world doesn't see that. So I have to be very specific in what I mean by family, what the church means by family.
And I've become familiar with the Diocese of Tyler, Texas, and they've just begun an institute, the St. Philip Institute for Catechesis and Evangelization. And that's going to be one of their highest priorities.
It has to be.
Is preparing for marriage and how do we support marriage.
Absolutely.
There's a large number of people from different cultural backgrounds who have kids, sometimes live together, sometimes don't, and they're raising children. What do we do to help? And the Institute is doing a lot now to doing the research to prepare good programs, and all the dioceses can learn from that kind of, and come up with their own creative approaches, given the different subcultures within our society.
And we have to be proactive. You know, we're reacting to a threat, to an assault, and we must. But we need to be proactive. So, for example, how do we, let's say that if you and myself have an opportunity, so that when it's time for us to pass into eternal life to the Heavenly Father, could we pass on the baton to our successor a much better? So let's say that we inherited 60% divorce. But when we pass, that it's 50, and they pass and it's 40, and they pass and it's 30. See, I don't think we're thinking that way. We're reacting. We need to react, yes, but we have to be proactive. And what you just expressed in Tyler is an example of both reacting to the current moment, but being proactive. And I back step a moment. I agree with you. We need to have a healthy conversation, especially our shepherds, our bishops, on the length of marital preparation. By no means am I comparing it to our preparation for priestly formation, but, you know, we should take a little more time.
Yeah, you know, and one of the things, too, that I keep on emphasizing, it is not healthy for a couple to cohabit before marriage.
No.
It's in that time of courtship and waiting and anticipation that you learn, I can trust you, and you can trust me to be faithful. If I have to give to your desires later on in marriage, how do I know when I'm gone on a business trip or sick or whatever? No, this is a time of preparation for so many things.
Absolutely.
And there's great wisdom, especially when you see the failure of what the world is doing.
Exactly.
We need to say, that's wrong,
That's right.
it's harmful,
Right.
and what we have to do is something that is much better. I want to make sure that, because we're running out of time.
Already.
Yeah. I want to make sure that we give some more information about the work of Human Life International. I want to make sure you can go to their website, which is hli.org. Right?
Yes.
And you have all kinds of updates.
And library of information, from documents. And
great documents. A lot of times priests and bishops don't know the documents. They're right there.
yes.
Also, you can call them at 1-800-549-5433. So it's 800-549-5433. And there are also great resources available.
Yes.
news of what's happening in the pro-life movement and pro-family movement around the world.
And also a chance to meet some of our pro-life family from around the world.
Yeah.
There's images and stories and you know, lots of information to learn.
Yeah, the great work going on all the continents
except Antarctica. But I found a volunteer.
I'd love to go. All right, well, why don't you join me in giving a blessing to our audience. May Almighty God bless you and keep you and cause His face to shine upon you. May He lead you and your families in His ways by His peace. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen. You know, we can have Father Shenan and so many other guests who come here, plus all the other programs, Dr. Ray Gurendi and his great work, only because Mother was inspired to let this network be brought to you by you. So as she always said, keep us in between your gas bill, your electric bill, and your cable bill. And God willing, we'll be able to pay all of our bills too. Thank you.
Thank you, Father, very much.
Thank you too.